What's up, agency owners? Jason Swenk here with another episode of the Smart Agency Masterclass, a podcast for the digital agency owner like you that wants to grow and scale their agency faster and create the freedom where they're not having to do everything themselves. And on today's episode, I have a great guest. We're going to talk about how you can leverage more speaking in order to really create more of a pipeline for your agency where you're basically picking and choosing rather than taking on the crap work that you know is going to be a pain in the ass. So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. Hey, Grant, welcome to the show.
Jason, thanks for letting me hang out with you, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So most importantly, the big stuff is I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We've been together for 25 years, married for 20 years. We've got three beautiful daughters. So it's me and a house full of women. So that's the important stuff for me and my world. It's me and a bunch of lovely ladies I get to live with. On the professional side, I've been in the speaking industry most of my career. And so I run a training company, coaching company called the Speaker Lab, where we teach people how to find and book paid speaking engagement. So I was a full-time speaker for about a decade or so, doing 60, 70 gigs a year, and just had a lot of people who were asking me like, hey, I want to book speaking gigs. How do I do that? And so we started teaching that, and that's really evolved to what we do today.
Well, speaking is a great way to build authority, right? And, I always tell everybody, and this is what I did for many years very wrong at my agency, is I always built the agency's brand versus my brand. And when I talk to agency owners, I'm like, well, are you building your own brand? They're like, no, we don't want. Then everyone is going to want to come to me and have me do all the work. And I'm like, no. They're going to come to your team, and then you hand off and you position it right. And it provides this amazing authority. Because I remember when we would speak, it's just tons of people would come up afterwards and be like, hey, you can help us. You get us. You understand us. So for the people listening that haven't really got into speaking, or maybe they've some taste into speaking, but they're really bad at figuring out, how can I get on stage? What's some advice you can give to them, or what are some action steps?
Yeah, and so what we do inside the Speaker Lab and with the clients and students that we work with is we teach what we call the Speaker Success Roadmap. It's a 5-step process that makes the acronym SPEAK. And so I think, Jason, to your question, like the first step of the process is really the core, the foundational piece that we really like try to drill home with speakers. So the S is to select a problem to solve. Now, this isn't exclusive to speakers. This is for agency owners, entrepreneurs, like any type of business owner. And so there's really two key questions that you got to get clear on. It's number one, like, who do you speak to? And number two, what problem do you solve for that audience? Now, the danger and the mistake that a lot of speakers make, and probably agency owners as well, is we want to cast the net as far and wide as possible. We keep it really, really broad and really, really vague. And so sometimes I'll ask speakers like, all right, tell me who you speak to. And they're like, I don't know. I speak to humans. I speak to people. My message is for everybody. It's like, yeah, that doesn't work, right? And the same thing is true when I ask like, okay, well, tell me what you speak about. And sometimes speakers are like, well, what do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything. It's just like, no, you can't. And so the more clear, the more narrow, the more focused you are, the easier it is to actually find and book gigs. And so again, it's counterintuitive, but like an example I like to use is, Jason, let's imagine that you and I are looking for a good steak. All right, we have a choice. We could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 different things that they offer, and they're all mediocre. Or you could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really, really well. Right? Steakhouses, they don't do pasta, they don't do lasagna, they don't do tacos. They do steak, and that's it. And so we always tell speakers, you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. Be really, really good at one specific thing versus being mediocre at a whole bunch of different things. So again, it sounds easy in theory, but when you really narrow down and you really focus in and you get that part right, then it becomes so much simpler to find and book gigs and doing it on a consistent basis.
Well, I find people look at the big guys, right? Like a Gary Vaynerchuk, a Seth Godin, and they're like, well, they're speaking to everybody and anybody, but they didn't start off there, right? Like Gary Vaynerchuk started off talking to wine people. And then, started getting bigger and bigger. And the funny thing is I remember I was speaking at an agency event a couple of years ago, and then this company came up to me wanting me to speak at their karate event. Like, it was just like weird stuff comes from it when you get really, really specific. It was a horrible speaking thing when these karate people did not get did not get my presentation, and they shouldn't have, because That's all I know is
Yeah.
agencies.
Well, I like to like another example I like to use is Nike. Like today, Nike is a multi-billion-dollar company. But if you go back in time, if you read the book Shoe Dog, which by Phil Knight, the founder, is a phenomenal book. But the way Nike got their start is they created this very specific type of running shoe for long distance collegiate runners. Right, this very specific shoe for a very specific audience. And then once they kind of get some traction there, literally, figuratively, like they start to build some momentum, then it's like, hey, what if we made a basketball shoe? What if we made an everyday shoe? What if we made a walking shoe? What if we made t-shirts? What if we made hats? And then it kind of evolves. And so the same thing with like a Gary Vee, like Gary Vee speaks on a whole bunch of different things, but originally, like he spent years just beating the drum of wine. Like that's it, wine, not alcohol, not beverages, wine, like a very specific thing. And he did that for a long time. So sometimes it's easy to look at, well, that person does it. Well, that person is not where you're at, right? You cannot compare where you are today, yet starting at point A to where someone else is at point M. So you have to even go back in time and look at like, where did they get their start? Because most of the time it was on one small specific thing, and then it maybe evolved from there. But again, start small, start very, very specific. And again, that's where it's easier to get a little bit momentum.
Yep. What's number two?
So the next part of the process, the P, is to prepare your talk. Prepare your talk. And so ultimately, just being really clear on like what's the solution that you are providing to the need, to the problem that exists for the audience. Be really, really clear on how you're going to go about providing that. Meaning, you could do that through webinars or seminars or keynotes or workshops or breakouts, and like they all work. And so being clear on what's the best means of delivery for you. Next part of the process, E, is to establish yourself as the expert. So two key marketing assets that all speakers need is number one, you need a website. In this day and age, if you don't have a website, you don't exist. And number two is you need a demo video. Now, what exactly is a demo video? So I want you to think of this like a movie trailer. So before any of us would go see a movie, we want to see the trailer. And what exactly is a trailer? Well, they take like a 90-minute, 2-hour movie. They're going to boil it down to 2 or 3 minutes. And within those 2 or 3 minutes, you have an idea of who's in it, what's the plot, what's the theme, what's the genre. And the point of a demo video and the point of a movie trailer is to make people want to see more. So you have to remember that an event planner, a decision maker who's hiring speakers, they are in the risk mitigation business. Meaning, if I hire you and I put you up on stage in front of my audience and I give you a microphone and I'm going to just let you have at it, I got to be really confident that you're going to make me look good. You're not going to embarrass me. You're not going to say something stupid or inappropriate or whatever that's going to get me in trouble with my board or boss or whoever, right? So they need to see some type of video. Again, just doesn't have to be like, they're not going to watch a whole video, but just a couple of minutes of like, okay, let's see, is this person a good speaker? What do they speak about? Is maybe like they're a phenomenal speaker. It's just not the style that perhaps we're looking for our event or for our audience. So a video is important. Next part of the process, A, is to acquire paid speaking gigs. Now, this is the part we want to fast forward to, but it's important here where you have to be clear on who you speak to, what problem you solve. You have your video, you have your website, you're clear on the solution that you provide. A mistake speakers make at this point is kind of like, all right, I have these things in place. Now I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. It's kind of like an agency. Like, okay, we solve one specific problem for one specific audience, and now we just wait for clients to magically show up. And like, Jason, you know better than I do, like it just doesn't work like that. And so you have to have a system and a process in place to be able to proactively reach out, find clients, and start to generate that flywheel and that momentum. And the last part of the process is K, is know when to scale. Meaning a lot of people who are interested in speaking are also interested in writing a book or coaching or consulting or some type of done with you, done for you service or agency. And you can do all the things, but you can't do all the things at once. So something's going to come first, something's going to come last. You've got to be clear about how speaking fits into the mix there. So again, that's kind of just a high overview, overarching view of what we teach, the speaker success roadmap on how do you find and book speaking gigs on a consistent basis.
Yeah, going back to, every agency has a website. But the person running it may not have their own personal website. And I think, I just wanted to highlight that you probably shouldn't just have one page on your agency site. You might, or that might work as long as you have the assets and that speaker reel there. Talk a little bit more about that, just
Yeah.
specifically for agency owners? Because a lot of
Yeah, let
times
me tell you
they're
specifically, like
leveraging
even
just the branding there.
what we do at the Speaker Lab. So I have two different sites. I have the speakerlab.com and I have grantbaldwin.com, and they point to each other, but it kind of depends what someone's looking for. So if someone's looking to come to us saying, "Hey, I want to learn how to be a speaker. I want to learn about speaker training. I want to learn how to find and book gigs," we're going to point to the speakerlab.com, right? If someone says, "Hey, I want to hire Grant as a speaker," then we're going to point to grantbaldwin.com, right? So they're two different sites. They serve two different purposes for two different audiences, depending on what someone's looking for. Now, if someone goes to the Speaker Lab and they're like, "Oh, I'm actually want to know how to hire Grant," well, then we're going to point back over there. But if on grantbaldwin.com, if someone's like, I'm not interested in Grant, I want to learn more about booking gigs, we're going to point them over to the Speaker Lab. So yeah, I think it's important to have two, and then you can again kind of cross promote them depending on what people are looking for.
Right. Now, let's say now that we have our page or our pages up for, getting speaking gigs and it highlights us, what's the best way to get speaking gigs?
Yeah, so there's a few different things that you can do. Again, one mistake here is to do nothing, and you just hope like, all right, I'm going to, let's say, post something on social media and let people know, hey, my website's here, book me, and then we just kind of again sit back and wait. But again, if you're clear on who you speak to, what problem you solve, then it becomes a lot easier to know where and how to find those. Okay, so let me give an example. When I was in high school, I remember one of the best days of the year was a snow day. And with a snow day, you get out of school and like, which I don't even know if they still do those now with Zoom days for students, but which is a huge bummer. But I remember a buddy of mine and I, we would, when a snow day would happen, we would go to the one of the rich neighborhoods in town, and we would go door to door, knocking on their doors, asking if we could shovel their driveways for 20 or $30 or whatever. And the way that this worked was we identified, here's a problem that exists in your driveway, and rather than just like I don't know, in those days you're sitting back and waiting for someone to find you in the yellow pages or something. It's not like we had a listing or an ad or something, or posting something on social media and hope someone just thinks of you. No, like going to the door and saying, you have that problem in your driveway, we can make that disappear for you literally right now if you'd like, for the right price, right? And so the same thing is true for speakers. Is when you're clear on who you speak to and what problem you solve, it's not difficult to find those type of events that you could potentially speak at. So let's say, for example, that you run a YouTube ads agency that's focused on realtors, right? So if we go back to that S, selecting a problem to solve, there's two questions we talked about: who do you speak to, what problem you solve. A third question is, where do those people gather? So if you're running a successful agency, you probably have a good idea of what are the associations, the groups, the gatherings, the conferences, the events that your ideal clients already are attending, that they're already at. And so at that point, then it's a matter of kind of reaching out to those event planners, those decision makers, those conferences, and starting conversations with them about how you can solve the problem that exists, right? So you're not trying to convince them to hire a speaker. They're already planning on hiring a speaker. You're just showing them why you are a good fit for their audience and for what it is that they would be looking
So
for.
how do you,
So I think it's important here to note that you have to have a long-term perspective on this, right? The same thing is true with an agency. Like, if you just reach out to a potential client cold, they may or may not be looking for you and what it is that you do at that moment. It doesn't mean that they never will, but at that moment, you may not catch them at the right time. But by reaching out to them, starting a conversation, figuring out what their next steps are, figuring out where they're at in the process, following up, having systems in place, it's not rocket science, but it does take discipline and a commitment to do it, versus just kind of reaching out to some people. Hey, if you need a speaker ever, I hope you think of me, and like never doing anything with it. Like that doesn't work. That's not effective at all.
how do you get their attention? Right. So some of the places, I'm just thinking of some of the places that I've spoke in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was always kind of the reverse mentality, right? It's kind of like, you come to me. But if I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go out and no one knew who I was or anything like that, how could I get these conferences attention? And then how often do I follow up? Because I find a lot of people go, oh, I reached out to them. I filled out their speaker submission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a few things that you can go, a few ways that you can go about this. Like email can certainly work, and it can be effective. I've booked hundreds and hundreds of gigs by cold emailing people, so it can be effective. Other things that you can do is if it's an event that you have personally attended or that you have any connection to, so you may already know who the event planner, or you may be, one or two steps removed from who the event planner or decision maker is. So looking for any of those type of introductions. Speaking is very much a momentum business, and the more you speak, the more you speak. You start to develop some word of mouth. You start to develop some relationships with other speakers who may refer you. You may develop relationships with event planners who refer you. You may speak at some things that over time that then they bring you back a few years later. But initially, you're like, it feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill, starting to try to just build a little bit of momentum there. But again, you plant enough seeds, and a lot of those seeds start to come back. So other things that you can do is again, if you know of any speakers that are speaking at similar types of events that you could get any type of introduction. If you're attending a conference and you can meet the event planner or decision maker at that type of event, that works really well. But I think, again, going back to, like, I still think that email can be effective. Now, when you're sending some type of email, the mistake that a lot of speakers make is they send some like 98 paragraph email about why they're so awesome and you should hire me, and here's the dozen things that I talk about. Like, nobody's going to read that's going to get deleted. But I always like to start with like a really simple basic email just to start a conversation, because when I send that initial email, all I'm trying to do is get a reply. That's it. So the shorter and the simpler the email, the more likely I'm going to get a reply. So a lot of times, one of my favorite emails to start with is to ask about their specific event, not just like, hey, do you ever hire speakers? But I came across XYZ conference. I see that it's happening in March. I was curious when you'll start reviewing speakers for that event. That's a really simple thing for them to reply to, right? Because I'm not just saying, hey, do you ever hire speakers, or do you ever, would you consider hiring me? It's just kind of like this vague, it's like emailing you and just saying like, hey man, how do you start an agency? It's like, sheesh, it's not something that you can easily respond to or answer. But if I can ask something that's specific, that's easy for them to reply to, I don't have to tell them, hey, here's my life story. Here's all, like, they can see my website in the link, or in the footer there. If they want to dig in a little bit more, they can see where my email is from, and don't use like an at Hotmail or at Gmail or something. Like, use your website, your personal domain, so people can go to that if they want to dig in a little bit more. But a lot of times if they reply and they give you, oh, we're going to start reviewing speakers in 2 months. Well, at that point, then what you can always ask is it okay if I follow up with you in 2 months? And 99 times out of 100, they're going to say that's fine, because they don't expect that you're going to actually do it, because nobody actually does it. And so whenever you say, I'll touch base with you in 2 months, then when you do, part of what you're doing here is you're giving them a taste of, this is what it's like to work with you. And Jason, you understand this from an agency perspective. If the product that you deliver is amazing, but the service, the experience of it sucks, people don't want to work with you. But if, like, man, every time that they said they were going to do something, they did it, they were on top of it, they followed through, they were easy to work with. When I needed something, they got it to me. Like, they were just on the ball. People want to work with service providers like that, whether you're a speaker, whether you're an agency, whatever it is that you want to do. So when I say, hey, is it okay if I follow up with you in 2 months, and then I actually do it, it's giving them a taste of, this is what is, if you hire me, this is the experience that you're going to get. Because you got to remember, for an event planner, a decision maker, and they're putting on an event, regardless of the size of it, a speaker's important, but it's one of hundreds of moving pieces that they're trying to think through and organize and juggle. So the easier you are to work with, the more likely they're going to want to be to work with you.
When when do you ask for travel or payment to speak versus free?
Yeah, so I think that I got a bunch of thoughts on this. One is, I think that speaking for free is okay, comma, as long as you know why you're doing it. Okay. The mistake a lot of speakers make is just like, I'm going to speak from the goodness of my heart and I hope that something magically comes from it. It's like, no, 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 don't do that. Okay. We're not running a nonprofit here. Like, we're running a business, and we've got to treat it as such. Okay. So I think it's important to note, though, as a speaker, you are providing something of value, and it's important for you to receive something of value. Now, the thing that you receive in terms of value may or may not come in the form of a check. And I think, again, a mistake that speakers make, and like a short-sighted mistake, is like, if I didn't get a check, I'm not going to speak for free. It's not worth it. But there's a lot of ways that you can receive value. Let me talk through a couple, especially for this audience. Like if you are an agency provider, if you're an agency owner, if you're some type of product or service provider, you go speak at an event. Let's say that you speak at it for free, but let's say that you speak at the right type of event and you pick up, let's say you pick up 3 new clients, and it's not even like they signed up right then. It's like you started conversations, you built relationships, and over the next 6 months, you have 3 new clients. And an average client's worth, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, depending on the nature of what it is that you do. Like that one speaking gig, you got 0 from the event, but it turned into 10, 20, 30, 50, $100,000 worth of business. That's way more than what they would have paid you in the first place. So I think, again, the nature of what so many of you already do as agency owners, speaking can be very, very lucrative when you're speaking at the events where you know the right type of potential client is going to be. So if you have some type of product or service, it can make a lot of sense. Let's say that you go speak at an event, and it's an event planner that you want to work with, that you just know, like, this event planner, they put on a bunch of events, or they're well connected. So one thing I've done before is I've said, hey, I'm willing to take, let's say, a discounted or even speak for free, and assuming I do a good job, and again, it's completely predicated on that. If I do a good job, I want you to introduce me to 5 other event planners or decision makers that you think that I would be a good fit for. And so if they introduce me to them and it leads to some additional gigs, like, that's value to me that costs them nothing. I'll give you one other example. I remember a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, he does not really speak at all. He reached out to me. He's like, hey, I got invited to speak at this thing in Spain. And he's like, I don't like, how much do I charge for this? And so we kind of talk it through, and he comes back to me. He's like, their budget's kind of small. I said, okay, here's what you need to do. It's like, let's see what they've got from a financial perspective, but let's also just say, like, let's get them to fly your wife over there. Let's have them book a couple additional nights at the hotel, and maybe some additional per diem, that type of thing. And he's like, yeah, actually, it turns out they have some budget for that. So he went, he spoke once, and then they spent a week in Spain. I was like, okay, you got a European vacation with your wife paid for on someone else's dime. Like, that's value, right? So again, I think it's not always as black and white as I got a check or I didn't get a check for the event. There's a lot of ways that you can receive value that may or may not show up in the form of a check.
Love it. Great advice. Well, this has all been amazing. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think would benefit the listeners?
Yeah, I think it's important just to, like, understand how speaking fits into the mix. There are speakers that, Jason, you and I both know, who do 100 gigs a year, and like speaking is all they do, and it's like a big core piece of what they do. And speakers that do 3 gigs a year, and that's fine. It's not that one's better or worse than the other, but you just got to be clear about how does speaking fit into the mix and what it is that you want to accomplish. But what's important to know is if you want to do a lot of speaking and you want it to be a bigger part of the business, and in fact, I like, from an agency perspective, I know a couple of people who they absolutely kill it as speakers. They get paid really, really well, and then they've got an agency that is just printing on the backside, and so it's paid lead gen for them. They get paid to do this. They build amazing rapport, connections with potential audiences who then want to work with them, and so it's a really, really lucrative way to build an agency. But if you do that, then you have to take speaking seriously. It can't just be this thing where you're just like, we threw up a page for speaking on our website, and now, hopefully it works out. No, like, treat it as an important part of the business if you want it to be an important part of the business. But if you're going, I want speaking to be, a bigger part of the business, but I'm going to treat it as kind of this secondary pastime hobby thing, then you can't expect, like, professional results. So again, put in the kind of effort into speaking with that connects with, like, the kind of results that you're expecting out of speaking.
I love it. Well, if you guys want to get more into speaking, I highly recommend you guys do your own website, be selective, like Grant was talking about, and literally start making a list of the people or that you need to contact, and literally start the connection now, kind of with that email that Grant said, because I can promise you this, just like he said, people do not think you're going to follow up. And then when you do follow up, they're going to be so surprised. And then you'll start that relationship and then ask for, other connections to other people putting on events. And I think you guys, you'll never look back, because I know the agency owners that speak, they're in such high demand, not as just speakers, but the agency is doing very well, and they struggle more on the delivery side than bringing business in. So, Grant, thanks so much for coming on the show. And if everyone listening, if you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, hit that little bell button, and share it out with someone. And if you guys want to be around other amazing agency owners sharing strategies like this and giving you advice to navigate quicker and avoid the landmines, I'd love for all of you to go to digitalagencyelite.com, check that out. And until next time, have a swank day.